At first glance, Bloodroots is not the type of game that would usually pique my interest. I remember watching a trailer for it during a Nintendo Indies presentation and not really pinging my radar. I think that has a lot to do with there being a lot of top-down action games these days that it's hard to stand out from a crowd. But now, having played Bloodroots in its entirety, the game not only surprised me in myriad ways, but by the time I hit the conclusion to this 6 to 7 hour journey, I was thoroughly won over. The story setup for Bloodroots is minimal and direct, but still leaves room for intrigue. The opening cutscene shows a Metal Gear Solid-esque group of villains chase down your main character and kill him in cold blood. This, of course, is not the end, as your Canadian-style protagonist, who sports a wolf pelt on his head, somehow comes back from the dead and is tasked with enacting his revenge, hunting down each villain in turn. Throughout the course of the game, you'll have moments in between levels where you sit by your campfire and get some minimal backstory and dialogue. For the most part, it's well written, but is certainly not the game's main focus. Bloodroots is an action game in all senses. It feels like a response to the success of games like Hotline Miami and Katana Zero in recent years, following the formula of killing enemies quickly, but also dying in one hit yourself. The unique thing that sets Bloodroots apart is that almost everything in the environment is a weapon, from a wooden post holding up a fence to a raw fish hanging out to dry. Bloodroots revels in the silliest and most ridiculous ways to kill your enemies. Additionally, these weapons have limited uses, so the game encourages you to constantly be jumping from item to item as you break your way through each arena. A particularly fun wrinkle are custom animated cutscenes that play when you finish the final enemy on screen. They often incentivize me to deliberately save a different weapon for the final kill each time, just so I could see them all. But a lot of the time you won't have such a luxury, and that's because Bloodroots is brutally challenging. Mistiming a swing or simply not anticipating enemies that charge at you will result in instant death. This certainly sounds like it could become frustrating, but in all honesty it never was. Bloodroots is so fast and frenetic that the one more try compulsion which defined games like Super Meat Boy and Celeste was in full force. At a point you figure out your most optimal path through the stage and just get faster and more practiced at executing it. Each of the game's 3 acts ends in a boss fight that are equal parts creative as they are challenging. They are also well checkpointed, which ensures that you aren't left repeating sections ad nauseum. There can definitely be frustrations though, and a lot of them come from any sort of platforming that is required of you. Your character doesn't always have a consistent shadow, and so it becomes very tricky to land on platforms that are essentially 2D art assets at an isometric perspective. It's by no means a deal breaker, but I did find myself annoyed a couple of times when I cleared a screen of enemies and then ended up dying to a poorly judged jump off the side, only to have to redo the entire screen again. The game also suffers from performance issues on Switch. For the most part, it holds a stable 30 frames per second, but as soon as physics effects like spreading fire rear their head, things start to get chunky. This isn't too frequent an occurrence, however, and for the most part is manageable, even in its worst moments. The one instance of complete unplayability I came across seemed to be a memory leak issue, where a 2D platforming sequence tanked the frame rate worse and worse every time I died. Thankfully, the game features an assist mode that lets you become invincible, which allowed me to push through what was otherwise an unplayable section of the game. Handheld mode is another consideration to make when choosing whether to buy the Switch version. For the most part, it is still very playable, but the zoomed out perspective and the relative tininess of objects that you can pick up on screen makes it a bit of a challenge to make out what's going on. Once you understand the design language, it's not too hard to pass, but is certainly a factor for those with poorer vision. Bloodroots succeeds in creating an incredibly fast-paced and compelling action experience. The fluidity of movement and speed of chaining one kill to another creates this sense of forward momentum that rivals only the best in the genre. You may want to pick this up on another platform if frame rate and performance are your chief concerns, but despite its few shortcomings, I couldn't put Bloodroots down and have to give it a strong recommendation.